Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and sin that clings so closely, and let us run with perseverance the race that is set before us. Today, we take off on lap number 5. Each Sunday for the past 4 weeks, we have used this text from Hebrews and imagined that we have been running our lives as if around a track. Surrounding us in the stands is this great cloud of witnesses. And each week, one person from the crowd, one of the heroes of the faith, has come down to run a lap with us. So far, Daniel, David, Ruth, and Esther have each run a lap with us, sharing their words of wisdom as they run around the track. Each of them has given us a word of encouragement to take with us on our own race. We started off with Daniel, who reminded us to be faithful and to trust in God. Ruth instructed us not to close ourselves off to the unexpected ways that God works and moves in the world. Esther encouraged us to say yes to opportunities to be a part of God's plan. And last week, as we ran around the track with David, he shared with us the importance of discernment, to pay attention to the voices inside of us. So today we are ready for our next witness to come down from the stands and to run with us as they cheer us on. So we turn to the last 13 chapters of the book of Genesis, where we encounter a young shepherd named Joseph. Joseph's story begins in the land of Canaan, sometime between 16 and 1700 BC. He was the 11th of 12 sons born to Jacob and his second wife, Rachel. Being born when Jacob was very old and to his favorite wife, Rachel, these caused Jacob to love him more than any of his other sons. This is how Joseph ends up with that famous coat, that long, expensive robe with sleeves that was given to him by his father. Might not seem like that big of a deal, but it would kind of be the equivalent of maybe a parent today buying a brand new designer leather or whatever popular brand jacket for one of their children while the others got nothing. So not only was Joseph loved more by his father than any of his siblings, but everyone knew it because of this extravagant gift. As you can imagine, this didn't sit very well with Joseph's brothers. Their negative treatment towards him becomes the first of many struggles that Joseph encounters in his life. To make matters even worse, though, Joseph decides to tell his brothers about 2 dreams he has. And in those dreams, his family ends up bowing down to him. Now his brothers interpret these dreams as Joseph standing in a position of authority over him. And this only fuels their jealousy and hatred toward him. Now, it's tempting to our modern day ears that this sounds like an overreaction on the part of Joseph's brothers. It's tempting to tell them, all right, calm down. It's just a dream. Let it go. But dreams in the ancient Near East were not just some kind of process that happened in the mind while you slept. Dreams back then were thought to be divinely inspired, some foreshadowing of a divine destiny. So Joseph's dream and his brother's interpretation of it rattles them. They cannot possibly imagine a scenario where one day they or their parents will end up having to bow down to their despised Joseph. And these dreams end up being the final straw in the brothers' hatred toward Joseph. The next scene in the story offers the brothers an opportunity to take matters into their own hands without the all-seeing eye of their father around. Leaving Joseph behind, one day they gather their flock of sheep and head out to graze 50 miles near the settlement of Shechem. For some reason, Jacob decides to send Joseph out to check on the brothers and bring word back to him. Now, why he would send Joseph out on his own, far away from home, to see about his brothers, whose hatred and jealousy is boiling over, is curious. Is he so naive to think that the brothers are going to magically work things out peacefully while they're alone? Is he not worried, at least a little bit, for the safety of his beloved son? I mean, of all people, Jacob knows what brothers are capable of doing to one another, and yet he sends off his favorite in search of the others. Now the brothers see him coming, and when they do, they begin to conspire with one another about killing him. Because if Joseph is dead, then his dream can't come true, right? They can ensure that Joseph would never be put in a position where he could have any authority over them. So the debate back and forth about what exactly to do with him when he reaches them. Should they kill him outright? Should they leave him just to die in the wilderness? They decide instead to throw him in an empty cistern, and then later to spare his life by selling him to some Ishmaelite traders that are passing through on their way to Egypt. They take his beloved prized coat, smother it with goat's blood, and bring it back to their father, who falls into a deep grief, believing that his son is dead. So now, not only is Joseph hated, but he has been sold into slavery and taken away from his homeland. When he arrives with the traders in Egypt, he is bought by an Egyptian official named Potiphar. And his time in Egypt and with Potiphar brings more ups and downs to his life. But despite all that he has been through, the text tells us that the Lord was with Joseph and he became a successful man. Probably not quite what he or his brothers would happen in this whole ordeal, but slowly over time, Joseph's status actually rises within Potiphar's household. And everything that Potiphar owns, he entrusts into Joseph's care. After all that he has been through, things finally seem to be going pretty well for him. I mean, not only is he being well cared for in this foreign land, but he actually succeeds beyond what anyone would have imagined. Even though he is far from home, surrounded by this foreign culture, he has made a life for himself, and his troubles seem to have smoothed themselves out. But one day, his good fortune will take a turn, and everything will once again come crashing in around him. You see, while he has been living with Potiphar, his wife, Potiphar's wife, has become rather fond of Joseph, and she tries her hardest over and over to seduce him. Day after day, she makes advances of him, and day after day, he refuses her. Maybe it was the accumulation of being rejected so many times, but one day she encounters him alone in the house. She reaches out and grabs a hold of the cloak he is wearing, repeats her command for him to lie with her, and as he escapes from her grasp, a piece of his cloak is left in her hand. And just as his brothers used a piece of his clothing to betray him, the woman does the same. She takes the piece of clothing and falsely accuses Joseph of trying to seduce her. Now, obviously, Potiphar believes his wife, and he becomes enraged, and Joseph finds himself in prison. So this is now at least the third time in Joseph's life that something has gone from good to bad, where he has found himself going from success and favor to being mistreated and despised. Just as his life seems to be rocking along, something unexpected happens and knocks him back. And these setbacks that he experiences, they're not just small inconveniences. These are major life-altering events. Sibling rivalry and jealousy are not uncommon, but I don't know many people who would sell their sibling into slavery, no matter how much they disliked them. All of these actions send Joseph from his home, his father, his friends, his culture, his religion, into a land that was unfamiliar, all by himself. And then when he is seemingly adjusted, or even does better than perhaps anyone would have thought, his life is once again turned upside down. And yet, through every single struggle, Joseph perseveres. He takes things as they come, one day at a time, and makes it through. And not only does he make it, but each time he finds himself in one of these rough patches, God is there, working behind the scenes in and through the people that Joseph encounters. While he is in prison in Egypt, Joseph's skill set gets put to use. He interprets 2 dreams of several of his fellow inmates, and both of these dream predictions turn out to actually happen and be true. Now, one of these men whose dreams he interprets is actually Pharaoh's butler. So Joseph thinks that there might be some opportunity here to be able to use his dreams and somehow get out of prison, because Pharaoh's butler promises to Joseph that when he goes back to serve with Pharaoh again, he will remember Joseph. But the butler doesn't fulfill his promises for 2 full years. By that time, I imagine Joseph would have long given up any hope of being to get out of his current circumstance. But somehow or another, after those 2 years, the butler finally follows through on his promise. Joseph is brought to Pharaoh, and he successfully interprets Pharaoh's dreams. Because of his gifts, Joseph is able to help prepare Pharaoh and Egypt for a famine that will last 7 years. This also provides Joseph with the opportunity to have a prominent position in Pharaoh's government. So once again, in the midst of a challenging situation, his luck slowly rises. He becomes one of the most powerful men in Egypt, second only to Pharaoh himself. So again, we have an example of what started out as a terrible situation, and some good is able to come out of it. I think it's interesting that what originally got Joseph into this whole predicament to begin with, his interpretation of dreams, is what ends up saving him in the end. Now, when the famine that he predicted is in full swing, and word gets back to his family that there is plenty of grain in this neighboring country, Joseph's brothers make a series of trips from Canaan to Egypt in hopes of providing for their struggling family. Now, Joseph encounters his brothers on their first trip to Egypt, but he conceals his identity. So he recognizes his brothers, but his brothers don't recognize him. So he takes advantage of this opportunity and actually ends up testing his brothers. And when the test is complete, Joseph reveals his identity, and the news that he is alive and well makes its way back to his father. Now his brothers are fearful of what may happen to them, but Joseph shows great compassion and ends up forgiving them. And in fact, his whole family, his father, his brothers, all of their wives and children and livestock end up moving and resettling to Egypt, where they are not only welcomed, but well provided for. Joseph's life has a lot of ups and downs to it. And these ups and downs are not unfamiliar to many of us in this room. Things are going along fine when some event shakes things up and we find ourselves in a rough patch. We may stumble through the challenge and then things may smooth out again for a while, but inevitably another curveball gets thrown our way. A breakup or a divorce, a death in the family, the loss of a job or a friendship, maybe an investment that doesn't go the way we had hoped for or planned, an unwanted diagnosis or a car wreck. I'm sure there are other examples we could think of. All sorts of events happen in our lives that cause us pain and frustration, that throw us for a loop and cause us to stumble or to question. And we oftentimes are tempted just to give up, to throw in the towel. But as we run this lap with Joseph, his word of encouragement is to persevere with hope, to not give up, but instead to keep running our race. Throughout Joseph's story, the author repeatedly tells us in the text that the Lord was with Joseph. Through every trial he faces, through every betrayal, every move, every pit or prison cell he finds himself in, God never leaves him. He experiences human abandonment multiple times, and he is far from his home and his homeland, but whatever situation he finds himself in, God is there with him, and he weathers every misfortune that is thrown his way. In chapter 39 of Joseph's story, it says that the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love. Hesed. It's that Hebrew word that doesn't exactly translate into English, but as best we can tell, it means kind of a kindness or a loving kindness is how it's most often translated. And it's a verb that when it's used to describe God, conveys how God attends to the needs of creation. And here in chapter 39, when that verse or that word is used, it has a specific emphasis on redemption from trials and enemies. So what that one small verb tells us is that God was not merely present with Joseph, but God was active and working in these difficult circumstances. When he is being sold into slavery or when he is imprisoned, even when his brothers despised him, God remained faithful and loyal to Joseph. And God works through Potiphar. He works through the chief jailer. God even works through Pharaoh and provides a way. You know, Joseph's life probably didn't plan out like he would ever have imagined or hoped for. But because of his perseverance and because of God's hesed, the evil that he encounters is used for good. Time after time in the text, God took the evil that humans had done and made it into something good and life-giving. Because he persevered and did not give up, Joseph was used by God and molded into a person who lived with integrity, who was able to forgive his brothers, and who worked for the good and for life. There are plenty of times where Joseph could have easily given up or taken another way. He could have slept with Potiphar's wife. He could have mistreated his brothers. He could have abused the power and authority that he had been given, but not once does he waver. He stays the course, and good emerges from unexpected people and places. Life inherently brings with it sorrow and joy, good times and bad. There is no escaping pain or frustration or loss. They come with the territory of human life. But what Joseph reminds us of is that in the midst of these events, we are not alone. Even when others may abandon or betray us, God remains steadfast, and we too are recipients of that same chesed. Joseph encourages us to persevere because he knows that even in the most trying and painful of circumstances, God is there, always working for the good of creation. As we encounter the ups and downs of life, may we too have the courage and strength to keep running our race with perseverance, taking one day at a time, remembering that God is active and present through it all.